Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Disclosure in the Media. I'm here with Ryan Poldenkarns once again, um,
Hello.
and we are here to talk about more of the life of Talos and more of the dichotomy between the man and the god forms, which this is actually a quite fascinating subject to myself. But as I've been doing on all the newer shows now, I'm going to open the circle to true benevolence, true benevolent communications, and true benevolent protected conversations and channels and accurate information only. So from this point forward, you can take it away, Ryan.
All right. Well, to get in today, we'll be talking about the god Talos and the dichotomy between the god and the man, the arguments for his divinity and against his divinity, as well as the sort of what he could be in a the god form may be an amalgamation of multiple characters, not just Tiber Septim, who we've talked about primarily throughout this series, as well as the reason the Thalmor do not wish Talos to be a god, and why they are so fanatical in their hunting of Talos worship and that kind of sphere of it. And finally, we're going to end with a bit of a talk about worshipped beings and basically the splitting of elements within gods and stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, let me just get the photos up.
Yeah, this should be interesting, everybody. We always warn against worship and how its effects on different beings can be, how drastic it can be. So,
All right, so yes, we've talked about old General Talos in the first episode of this Talos three-parter, and how General Talos how was basically spent the early part of his life in Skyrim creating the kingdom of Culhane, and how they eventually took the Imperial City, coming down from southern Skyrim and northern Cyrodiil to carve out this northern Cyrodiilic state, and how Talos then may have betrayed Culhane or was survived an assassination attempt against both of them, which took Culhane's life. Culhane became effectively Emperor Zero of the third Imperial Dynasty, and then Talos became the Emperor. Tiber Septim, he was renamed once he became Emperor with the and was ordained by the gods because he was dragonborn and could wear the Amulet of Kings, proving to all the people of Cyrodiil, his enemies and not his enemies, that he did have right to rule. And then we talked about how his campaigns unified Cyrodiil, sometimes through deals and backroom agreements, and also through just pure violence and destruction. But at the end of the day, it created the most stable empire that Cyrodiil and Tamriel had ever seen. And that Talos, or Tiber Septim in this case, ruled considerably longer than a normal man would have ruled, and created, yes, one of the strongest dynasties that has ever graced Tamriel. And actually, I would say it is the strongest dynasty because it lasted the longest, the entirety of the Third Era, which was like 500 years, and it wasn't super stable because there was multiple emperors in that period, more than you would expect if they all lived their entire reign of their lifetime. But yeah, and there were some civil wars and things, but for the most part, there was no large breakaways and large provincial wars.
hmm.
There were a few attempts to break away, but nothing major that wasn't dealt with. Basically, the Cameron usurper was the worst crisis during this period. That and Potima, the Wolf Queen. But
Yeah.
we'll move on. So now he's passed on from the mortal plane, and he begins to be worshipped as a god. Now, there were parts of Imperial and Nordic culture that already worshipped him as a god during his lifetime, especially in the Nords, because any Dragonborn kind of gets the Ysmir like title whenever they become like recognized as a dragonborn. Now this is named for Eastmere Wolfhearth, which is we'll talk about him a little later, but the he's a dragonborn ruler in Skyrim from ancient times that appears in very different time periods throughout the lore all over the place, but basically for what you need to know here is that he was being worshipped as like this dragonborn being in Skyrim already, and in Cyrodiil, there were certain sects that definitely worshipped him as like the an avatar of Riemann Cyrodiil, because Riemann Cyrodiil was also being worshipped at this time still.
Okay.
And then basically part of that Riemann Cyrodiil worship would have folded into the Talos worship as well. Um, what had happened at this point is he becomes kind of openly considered a god by the Imperial Pantheon, the Nine Divine Pantheon, which was there's arguments that it was the Eight Divines before this event, and then there's arguments that it was a Nine Divines thing before that, with Riemann Cyrodiil as the ninth divine. And I think that's like a sect thing. There was a sect that did, and there was a sect that didn't.
It's just like with some religions, they like with Islam, some believe the succession to Muhammad was Ali, and another sect believes it's someone else before Ali. Things like that. It's like differences between sects of like different religions. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
But it's openly agreed upon that Talos will be considered a god as Talos going forward into this third empire, especially because the rulers were his kin, and his feats on the face of Tamriel are the kind of thing that only a god could have achieved in many people's eyes. Unifying Tamriel had never happened in its entirety, and it may never happen again in the lore. So this is a big deal and definitely earned a lot of people's respect. So
It's just like with Odin, assembling the nine realms. We came to find out the real guy actually did something very similar to the character, or the character did something real similar to Odin, where he assembled basically the whole nine provinces or territories into one grouping. With also the what am I supposed to say? Okay, yeah, with oh man, now I'm getting really memory wiped today, folks. Sorry. With uh, oh yeah, this is what I wanted to say. The grouping of the nine. There's a couple different meanings of this in reality. You have people channeling a group called the Nine a lot, and but I came to trace it back to more Orion origins. Even though Gene Roddenberry mentioned a group called the Nine in a book called Earth Planet of Choice at the very end, where he himself did some channelings of this, and he was asking questions, about Jesus, about mythology, all this other stuff. But they trace back to also the nine gods of Egypt. Also, you have the Pleiadian Council of Nine that likes to pop up in channelings now, and these are actually Orion and Aldebaran, the sources that are popping up in this. So in this, they're fusing the story of Odin forming the nine realms, and then you have the Council of Nine, Pleiadian Council of Nine, or the Nine. Sometimes it's as they're just known as. Even when I was a younger person, in my teenage years. I would even call out to the nine before I knew they were bad. And I noticed that at the same time, when you asked them to do something, they did it like what change weather patterns. I was in school wanting to go on a field trip. I called out to that, and I noticed the weather changed and everything. But with that, oh man, they are really wiping me today. I just feel this really intense, like overwhelming, like something's pulling this out of my head, not wanting us to amalgamate it with this material, but with this, the nine is also considered like a triple trinity, like for Jesus and Christianity. But also on top of that, artificial intelligence likes to use it as forms of synchronicities, like with the 111, 222, 323, 444 patterns, and they like to couple the synchronicity with something that's real. So therefore, people have coupled this together over time. It looks like the game lore also coupled it together. So it's basically the amalgam of like what we call the yield, where you have true information mixed with some falsities in there that the AI and Orion's crammed in there. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's what was coming up for myself. But man,
Oh,
these memory wipes, man, that was really hitting hard for that 3 seconds there. But yeah.
all right. So now you have in Imperial Chapels. This would be Talos's stained glass window, and within the Imperial Pantheon, Talos represents. He's the hero god of mankind. He's a conqueror god, of course, god of might and honor, state and law, and the god of men. And this, so elves already don't. Not most elven groups won't primarily worship him for anything more than law giving and, I guess, bravery in battle. He is really the god of man, and he's the god of man in man's new seat as the progenitors of this world, and how basically the coming of Tiber Septim has ushered in an era where it is the dominance of men over the other races that is established a peace that when the other races have claimed dominance could never have reigned supreme. And part of that is due to the fact that it is the Imperials that are at the seat of this empire. If the Nords were, it would have been a far more violent takeover. But the Imperials are far more willing to make deals to get things done. And even though Talos himself in life was either a Breton or a Nord, part of that culture definitely rubbed off on him and was able to allow him to use every means necessary to get this done. And there's no better picture than this, really, of these windows, but it shows him as almost like a warrior monk in this depiction, as opposed to like an armored god of war. It shows also that he has this regal side to him that can rule through peace instead of having to do everything by the sword. But the sword is still there. It shows that both are necessary for this.
Oh yeah, where he can be the monk when necessary and the warrior necessary. This is what also some of the new age groups don't understand, is where you can't set aside that side. It's what interchanges what is needed for that particular moment in time. Like if you had a past life as a warrior, like really hardened warrior, but now you come into this one and are needing to use more monk tendencies. This is where sometimes certain energies aren't conducive to a particular moment in time, but you have to interchange them based on the need and based on what is needed for that specific moment. And this image depicts that perfectly, where he was able to interchange that at a time of where it was needed most.
Yep. So now we're going to go into arguments for and against. Actually, we're going to skip and talk about the other option of what Talos could be. So far we've talked about Talos as Tiber Septim, or Talos Stormcrown, son of Atmora, after his death, transitioning into a god. That is true from the worship side of it, that this worship only began properly after the death of Tiber Septim the man. But all the amalgamation of beings that may become Talos the god is far bigger than just the dragonborn emperor Tiber Septim, who some claim was not even a dragonborn. And this shows it great. King Ysmir Wolfhearth, the king side of Talos, would be the king, that Nordic king I talked about, that all Dragonborns now get that title, was still alive during this period, and it is implied that King Ysmir Wolfhearth helped Hjalti Earlybeard, who is said to be the pre-Tiber Septim name of the character that would become Tiber Septim in this timeline. to pacify High Rock in that period. Now, he wasn't a king anymore, but he still held considerable power and backroom stuff because he was kind of like banished from death at that point.
Mhm.
And so he couldn't sit on his throne anymore because he knew that would draw way too much attention to him if he was like this non-dying king. So he kind of just decided to pull the strings of the world from behind closed doors. Not in a negative way, just like he just knew that it wouldn't look good to have a king that doesn't die, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, he just kind of decided to like work at Tamriel from the unseen area, but he was a dragonborn, and the argument is that the dragonborn bit of it was kind of Hjalti got that because Wolfhearth did things claiming to be Hjalti.
Oh, from behind the scenes, he just used the name. Yeah, yeah. From yeah.
No, like Hjalti and Wolfhearth had an agreement,
Okay.
and whenever Hjalti, who decided that he needed to be dragonborn for whatever his ambition to work, needed something to be done by a dragonborn, by the dragonborn version of himself, Wolfhearth was sent out to do it with his dragonborn abilities.
Okay. Okay.
Like Wolfhearth kind of subjected himself to Hjalti's leadership because he knew Hjalti would be a better public face.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
and then this also gives into the reason why the Emperor Talos never could use the dragon's tongue once he was an emperor. You know what I'm saying? Like, so Tiber Septim could never use the dragon tongue. Now, he cut his own throat to try to claim that, but if this is the case, he never was a dragonborn to begin with.
Oh, he
So,
didn't have the voice. He didn't have the voice to begin with. Yeah. So
yeah,
that
so
that
now
makes
he's
sense.
just trying to get rid of the idea of that because later on, Zurin Arctis, who is the mage that helped Hjalti in this scenario, become to subjugate everything by powering up the Numidium using arcane power. It is implied that Zurin Arctis used the life force of Ysmir Wolfhearth to power the Numidium. Now,
Okay.
it's also implied at different times that Tiber Septim used Zurin Arctis's life force to power the Numidium.
Okay.
And that regardless of which this is, Zurin Arctis and the Underking and Ysmir Wolfhearth did kind of mix. So the Underking is the being that Ysmir Wolfhearth was calling himself at this period.
Okay.
Now, Zurin Arctis and him kind of melded, so we don't know. Because the
Okay.
Underking claims to be both when you meet him in Daggerfall. Because he's still alive during Daggerfall, and you can actually cast him out of life, and that's one of the endings of the Warp in the West. And interestingly, in the games, in Daggerfall itself, and in Arena, Talos is not a god that is worshipped at all.
Hmm.
Only in the games past Daggerfall does Talos make an appearance. It is also implied that Talos worship was not something in the Empire prior to the Warp in the West, which is that dragon break, and that Talos worship is a result of the Warp in the West.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because you have something like a dragon break, which is like basically a quantum state of both is and is not. So you have the man, and then you have the god portion. That also I found out the same thing happened to Atlantis, like I said before, where there was like a dragon break type event on Atlantis, and like a temporal split, and you have this parallel reality of which some of them exist in now. So this also makes sense with the if the two at the bottom there merged and they were the same person. This also makes sense that one was kind of pulling the strings over the other, and they pulled this smoke and mirrors thing. Now you have all three, which are a component like the basically almost like a holy trinity, like I said before, which the church uses is quite a bit. And this is kind of like the Father, Son, Holy Spirit type of scenario. Where you have the fourth thing in the center, though, which is like the heart of the whole thing, which is Talos. Now, in a energetic sense, can you merge beings together and create new ones, like fusing water together and creating a much greater body of water? Yes, you can actually do that. You can create new beings all the time, even with your creative thoughts and creative outbursts. You can like what Frank Frazetta came through and said one time. You could literally he could take his art art pieces and create a whole world somewhere, even a whole universe of nothing but his art pieces. That goes back into multiversal rules. What doesn't happen here happens there. So if you create something, of course, there's going to be eventually a whole universe that reflects that. You can actually do that. I even saw somebody joking on Facebook not that long ago. They were looking at they were jokingly looking at a freeze frame of Grand Theft Auto 5 and said, somewhere in the multiverse, this is happening. Somebody was joking, but there is a certain truth to that where you can create that. This amalgam makes sense where with this Malcolm, but also the story of the Dragon Break makes a lot of sense to me because the worship was not happening before the Dragon Break or the Warp in the West. It was like what you said with Manny Marco and the King of Worms, where there was the God portion and then there was the man portion.
Yes, and
Yeah.
this is sort of reflective of that, as well as the fact that with the Warp of the West, these two beings that kind of amalgamated into the Underking both died. And the being that was Tiber Septim also died. So now all three of them are dead, and now the worship begins.
Mm. Okay, see that also makes sense. Also, the fact that they have the Numidium in it, that is this gigantic robot like form with a tesseract heart or cube, also was named in Greek mythology on the Isle of Crete was also named Talos. So though they added there's bits of that they've taken from Greek mythology. I also did a channeling years ago, which to me is rather dubious now, but where I channeled a Talos-like figure that was more of this robotic figure. It said he was from the future and that he was essentially an amalgam of multiple figures in history in his AI core. I don't completely trust it, but it's still a good example. There's also a group of giants that called themselves members of a world of Talos. I feel that was a dimensional state more than an actual planet, like in The Witcher with all the conjunction of the spheres, where it was a different world and a different plane. I don't see it as more alien. I see it as earthly, like with other titans and giants. But with this actually makes a lot of sense to me with the Dragon Break. What I've been learning about an actual event. This was I found out Enlil that used the Ark of the Covenant in a similar way that the Numidium was used. This is where they were getting some of this from, where he literally took down the walls of Jericho with the Ark of the Covenant. Even though it was the story of the horns that surrounded the walls of Jericho, it was actually the Ark of the Covenant that pulled this particular thing off. The same went with Sodom, Gomorrah, all these things. There was anytime this particular device is used, it caused a dimensional and temporal break where there was more than one version of that device in existence at the same time. This is why people don't always know where the Ark of the Covenant is because it's literally existing in multiple places at once, thanks in part or mostly to a Dragon Break or Warp of the West type event because it was used more than one time. There was a similar event, like I said, on Atlantis that happened, which I feel that device was also there in like a Numidium type of scenario. Then, of course, in biblical times as well. And that's where you're getting some of this mixed with a lot of Odin's Forging of the Nine Realms story. But I feel that I get a very incredibly strong feeling that any of these types of events where you see splits in culture, whether somebody can't decide whether it is or isn't, it's both. It's just exactly like Talos' story. And this is where in history, like Jesus' history, where the history's slightly convoluted a little bit, you don't really know, or history surrounding certain gods, you don't really know whether it's man or God. It's actually all of the above, and it's exactly the same type of situation that you're seeing here. Can there be aspects of other beings? Absolutely. I saw like the Enlil of Jesus dichotomy where it was the same being. Granted, that pegs him as Lucifer or Loki, or in this case, Lorcan. They're kind of or Saturn. They're basically leaning towards that. I know you haven't gotten that section, but they're leaning towards that in this story as well, with the way the elves view him.
Okay.
Also, I know that was a lot. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm trying to get my head around part of that as well. Yeah, so that's the Trinity thing. And that Ysmir Wolfhearth was the Dragonborn person that would have been responsible for most of the deeds of the General Talos character. Tiber Septim did lead the Empire in this early period, and Zernark helped create it, and Ysmir Wolfhearth did as well. All of them kind of, but then Talos was like Tiber Septim when I refer to Talos in this way is the was able to kind of outlast them in a power position and create the empire in the way he saw fit. The other two were kind of melded into this Underking person, and eventually, when they were destroyed during the Warp of the West, the worship of Talos properly started after all three beings that kind of contributed to that story were no longer on the face of Nirn. Now, this might just be the fact that the idea for Talos wasn't made yet, but we can't claim anything. And lore-wise, there's a reason for it. So I would be remiss if I... Yeah. So now we'll go into arguments for and against Talos' godhood. So we'll start with the argument for it, which we get the best evidence in Morrowind. And that is the character of Wolf. And Wolf is an Imperial officer in one of the forts in Morrowind that you can meet. This is a confirmed avatar of the god being Talos. And there's multiple of these avatars. There's 3 in Morrowind. I think there's one for Dibella, and then there's also one for I forget the name. I forget the god that has the other one. But you're able to meet this character, interact with this character, and yes, this is Talos the god, basically on the face of Nirn in a human form, doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no argument against it. He is an Imperial officer, and he is ensuring that his empire, I guess, continues.
Yeah, I can see that. This happens a lot, actually, where some people will be born as an aspect or avatar. This happens quite a bit in any of the known deities that you know. This happens quite often. So they even showed this in the show Moon Knight, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they basically had these gods select the person after they were already born. It can go that way, but it's actually more than likely they are born as an aspect thereof.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Wolf. Also, the other greatest example is that the temples of Talos in the games give you buffs when you go pray to them. The shrines of Talos remove diseases, just like every other divine shrine in Skyrim. The priests can give you boons. Now, that might be due to the magical abilities that the priests have that are not just coming from religion, but regardless, there's power behind the worship of Talos. So that in itself is a reason to believe that he did achieve godhood, right? Or is at least got some power from currently. But the fact that he can present as an avatar and can and rituals to him give boons proves that there is some power there. And that's the argument for. The argument against is a bit more convoluted and has to do more with a certain group's viewpoints than an argument against divinity outright. Because they do believe he is a god, but they do not believe he is this beneficial god of man that he claims to be. And that is the Thalmor arguments. Now we're getting into why the Thalmor started the war, that they started the Great War, and why there is this, why they hunt Talos worshippers after the White Gold Concordance so, fervorously. And it is down to the Thalmor's viewpoint that they are worshipping the trickster god Lorcan through the worship of Talos. So here's Lorcan, right? And he tricked, and then we need to go back to the foundation of Nirn as a thing for this to understand this. So the Thalmor view Talos as an aspect of the god Lorcan. And that is because Lorcan was a god of men. Lorcan led the men in the Elmafe Wars against the Elven factions. In reality, like the stories say, the Elves won. Clearly they didn't. Because they had a lot less of the planet when that war was over than the men did. The men had Atmora, and there were men on Tamriel already, and the Elves were literally on one island at the bottom of the planet. Clearly, they didn't win
Hmm.
territorially wise. So
It's like the natives being stuck on reservations. It's kind of a similar type of scenario. Yeah.
yeah. Now,
Yeah.
when they expanded out, did they get positions of power quite quickly? Yes, because their culture was more advanced and remembered a bit more of the past than the men did. The men were more fractured, but they had less territory. So I'm going to claim right out that the men, and even though Lorcan himself lost in the war, the men won. But because he's a god of man and has this title of god of man, and especially because there's a dragonborn association and all kinds of other nonsense that they claim that it's Lorcan parading behind this mask of Talos, and that Tiber Septim in life was a great man still, but he is no god. They don't deny the greatness of Tiber Septim. He put them to the sword in the worst way ever. They don't deny that. They deny his divinity because they believe that he was either an avatar of Lorcan in life or in this god being is just Lorcan parading in a new face.
Okay. Yeah. This that
And that
actually
that would
makes
be,
sense to me.
and they've claimed this before with other beings that have achieved godhood, but they never had political power enough to do anything about it. The Thalmor were never incorporated in the Somerset Isles were never incorporated into the Second Empire that worshipped Rim and Cyrodiil, who also parts of his worship were integrated into the worship of Talos later. Except for in Hammerfell, where he is remembered as his own thing. But this view that Talos is Lorcan is why they fervently hunt down people that they think worship Talos after the White Gold Concord. And that's why they went to war with the Empire in the first place, because they view it, and this is the most simple way I can say it, they basically view worship of Talos equals worship of Lorcan. Lorcan tricked them into helping create the world that they're now in, their ancestors essentially, to create this world, but not knowing that they'd be trapped in this world after the fact.
Okay.
They view this entrapment that they're a trap, that this view that Lorcan being this god that trapped them, that any kind of worship of anything that could even be considered Lorcan is keeping them trapped. And until Lorcan is completely wiped from the face of the Nirn, they won't be able to achieve the return to the godly like status that all beings had prior to the creation of the universe.
Okay, this actually is making a lot of sense to me if you put it in that perspective, where it's like this trap by an overreaching, like trickster god, like how Loki, Lucifer, you kind of going that route. Saturn being like the soul trap, known soul trap type of scenario as well. Where I compared in earlier episodes to the aspects of Saturn, Satan, Loki, Lorcan, kind of thing. So I could see in a scenario if that was the case if that was the case, if you had a bunch of worshipers like what happened now, where people are worshiping Orion sources, where that empowers them to trap the world more. I understand that philosophy, but at the same time, also you can't basically tell people what to do at the same time, like the Thalmor are doing. I can understand the form of impatience where you're seeing other people getting embroiled in like propaganda or embroiled in like worship en masse. And like what was said in the Bible, those who gather more than two gather in my name, sort of type of scenario. I use that example because it's the same with the worship of Jesus. How do you know what they're empowering? And I always ask this of people that actually do worship. How do you know what you're giving your power to? This is why it's best not to give your power to anything. And even those that worship the earth, they always try to give energy to the earth. And I always tell them, no, the earth doesn't necessarily need it in that way. A little bit reverence, yes. Keeping it clean, yes. Balance, yes. Not destroying nature, yes. The same thing. If any god needs that form of veneration, they probably aren't worth paying attention to at that stage. If they require it, like in a trickster god sort of scenario, like Lorcan, even this image you're using is very much like a Fomorian wizard, where they require that type of attention in order to be able to enslave those that are worshiping them in form of like a weird infinity loop. You break that loop, then it's a good thing. Now, I don't agree with how the Thalmor are doing things. Obviously, in the game, they're representative like an Orion like agenda: divide, conquer, like to the Civil War in Skyrim, lord over, essentially. But seeing it from that other perspective, where they're seeing somebody empowering what they believe is a trickster god, yeah, you could understand how you got to get rid of every remnant of this. That's not a popular viewpoint, obviously, because I don't know. I agree with the Thalmor, because the Thalmor are more like the Orions, but it's still the same point here. One could also argue, in order to bring about the most divide and conquer, if you go even further out from the traditional Civil War scenario that's in Skyrim, what about the Thalmor also falling for Lorcan by causing a war that would empower more to worship Talos? One could argue they were wrong for doing it that way as well, if they're trying to get rid of Lorcan worshippers. One could argue that particular god is lording over the entire set of conflicts, along with the other Daedric lord type of scenarios as well. Divide, conquer, and rule over. And there are multiple Orion lords in reality that do that very thing. So I'm kind of seeing this similar pattern right here with Lorcan. Just like Christians believe, of course, Lucifer is the main trickster god in that way as well. What they don't understand is, and this is an incredibly unpopular thing, what I'm about to say, both sides of the argument, from Luciferian and Satanic to Christian, are indeed worshiping the same side. And this is what I was able to actually figure out with Enlil having the split off aspect of Jesus. A lot of that story, unfortunately, didn't happen the way Christians believe it. But it goes back to this Lorcan type of worship where they're worshiping one thing and it really is another. Now, in the story of Talos, I don't think it is the same. It's more going along the lines of Odin's story, but at the same time, if you flip it around, this worship of Lorcan actually makes sense to what's going on in reality as well. Would I be a little peeved if I saw this? And I do see it a lot, but would I be a little peeved if it was this kind of scenario and I knew it was a trickster god? Yes, but they don't completely know for certain. They're just going on what their history was. But at the same time, I would be a little peeved too. I'm not on the side of the Thalmor in this by any means. It's just I understand this particular viewpoint because I've seen it pop up in major religions. I've seen it pop up in the dangers of worship. Worship beings, if you worship any being, you're giving them this creepy power, and they can mutate into other aspects of their original form. Even oversouls can, and it is very creepy when that happens. I've seen it happen with Jesus aspects that people have created out of their own worship. They've created aspects of what then is reflecting back like a poltergeist, and they think it's Jesus. Either that or reptilians doing it, Orion's doing it. Same thing with Michael, where different aspects of him got infected because of the worship aspect. Kali, I saw that with that being as well. So a lot of these different beings you never want to worship, ask for help from, yes, but never giving over energy to, no matter what. Whether it's something you think is benevolent, don't do it. You'll harm them, especially en masse. Or if it's something negative, obviously you don't want to give away your willpower. So I know that was a lot to digest, but that's where I'm at with this part of the subject.
Now, I mean, do they have any evidence that this is Lorcan? No. It's their belief that if anything, that basically I view it as xenophobia against men as well. The Thalmor are notoriously racist against anything that's not high elven anyway. So the issue here is that it could also just be based on xenophobia against men, and if men have their own god, that's too much for them.
It's essentially basically bigotry and racism on their part overall. Yeah.
Like I'm not justifying. Personally, I think their reasoning is a bit shallow, and I mean, it's really just a way to like impose their will upon other people. In my view. Now, I mean, the lore writers come right out and say, yeah, it is, but they haven't. So ultimately, right now, we can't say definitively either way.
Yeah, you can't. That I was just presenting both sides of the argument there, but you can't make it definitive unless somebody adds it into the lore, which I hope they do at some point, where they make it definitive one way or the other, which one's wrong, which one isn't. But it could do the whole Dragon Break scenario where they're both right. You never know. There's many ways this pie could be cut too.
Yeah, that could happen. It hasn't, and we'll see what happens in further games. But so far, there is no clear, like cut and dry answer, and I don't think there will be for a while, at least until Elder Scrolls 6, which is a ways off, to say the least. But now we'll cover the duality of God and man that is Talos, and how Tiber Septim, the man, the person that is widely remembered as Talos, because this idea of the three beings that become Talos is kind of only a lore concept. The people on the ground don't know that. They only view Tiber Septim having this the story that we went with the entire time. That the man, the Nordic man, or maybe Breton man, who led these armies, took this thing, built the empire. That's how the people on the ground see it. And there's the god and the man, and the issue here is the man did great things. We know where his tomb is. You actually go to his tomb in Oblivion to get his armor, because you need something with the blood of God on it. And actually, that's the other best. That is actually the best way to say he's a god. The Daedra view him as a god. The
Mm-hmm.
Daedra, who are gods of their own right, as they claim to be, and have worship of their own, uh, view him as a god, because to close the ritual needed for Martin Septim to close to end the Oblivion Crisis needed the blood of a god, and the way they got the blood of that god was they got Tiber Septim's in life armor, and I don't know how there was still blood on it like 500 years later, but there was dried blood, probably from some kind of interaction, and that blood was used in the ritual that then allowed Martin Septim to end the Oblivion Crisis. So if the Daedra view him as a god, then there's an argument that he's a god.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an argument from a god that's supported by other gods.
Mm-hmm. That makes a
So
lot of sense. They're viewing him on par with themselves, so that just basically ends the whole argument right there. Of course,
I
no, he's
completely
not doing
forgot about that until I just said it. But yeah, so there you go. The argument's not that he's not a god, really. The argument is he this god that the Thalmor claim that he is? Is he this avatar of Lorcan, or is he a god that is just a god of man and law giving, with no other darker behind the scenes aspect, which actually is only dark to the high elves, because regardless, Lorcan championed humans anyway, so it doesn't really matter from any perspective other than the human one, like other than
like
the elf.
Lucifer being the god of man, like the humanized god. It's kind of the same difference. Yeah, or like the sun bearer or light bearer type of thing. So yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Like have you ever seen the movie Devil's Advocate, where Al Pacino basically said he was a fan of man, he was the one that got them in touch with all their desires, all this other stuff. So I guess in retrospect in this, it doesn't seem to matter. It's that he was on the side of man, no matter what form he was. So that's very interesting. Even though in actuality, I found out Lucifer was actually dark in this respect, kind of like a Lurkin figure, and also Loki being the same being. In this, though, it's interesting, like you say, it didn't. From a man's perspective, it doesn't matter. It actually established something that was good. So,
Yeah, I mean, and then the things other than, like, yes, to the elves, all the parts of Talos the god that are devoted strictly to humanity is problematic. But the other things Talos stands for as a god within the pantheon are bravery in battle, uh, god of heroes and might and honor, and law giving. Those are not negative concepts. Those are
no.
necessary concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Their issue is that this is a god being worshipped by men and who was a man in life. And they view anything that comes from man to be sacrilege because it comes from man. The issue also here is that the Imperial Pantheon when it was initially set up, was a mixture of the Nordic Pantheon, with beings like Kinnereth being Kine, and Akatosh being the mix of Ariel and all the other. We talked about that whole big
Mm-hmm.
amalgamation. But that pantheon was set up as an agreement between elves and man to kind of co-opt their gods together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their biggest problem is they added a god that's strictly men to this what would have been an agreed upon group.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the argument some people have about Jesus even now, where it's like, oh, he was a man-made God. Was he a man-made God? Did he start out that day? Was he an aspect of God himself, sort of thing, meaning like Son of God? In this case, it was Enlil, an aspect of Enlil that was in a well, slightly different form. But also, people argue, oh, he was just a man that people anointed God. This goes back to the Jesus argument because of that and the royal bloodline of Jesus, which turned into the Marian Cabal line. That's one of the most reptilian lines that's out there. So it's like one could link some of the Dragonborn lore to that as well. So, but I'm still of the opinion that it was all some not necessarily one thing like there's a devil out there. No, I'm not going that route. I'm going with the route that it was part of the Orion agenda to divide people from themselves that they created worship. But it's still some of the same story being told in a slightly different flavoring, actually, in this with the Odin story and with the Loki and Asgardian stories with the beings coming from Atmora. Like I've said in the past, Atlantis and Atmora or Asgard were Atmora, essentially. So yeah, it's the same stories being told within this lore. If people really look, they're going to actually see a lot of the things that are actually they've been seeing all along in their own history. So this is why this falls under galactic history as well. It may not seem that way, but that's where I'm at with this. I don't know if there's any more to this before we go into the galactic portion, but is there anything else you want to add first, Ryan?
No, I just yeah, I mean that's kind of the gist of the story is that I think the Thalmor issue is only an issue for them, and that ultimately, when it comes to worship in these kind of fantasy settings, there's usually some kind of view where like either you're with us or you're against us. It's the same thing in Lord of the Rings with the whole Sauron, like the orcs worship them, and how Melkor tried to force everybody underneath him, and when the world was created anyway. So it's not like this is a constantly reoccurring thing
Mm-hmm.
in many forms of media, and it even if Talos has these negative to the elves background, right? It still doesn't change his dichotomy to men at all. So
No, no, not at all. It doesn't change a thing for men, even if it changes for elves. And that's where the point of contention is, and of course the white golden cordate. So this I find this whole thing interesting. How these interesting parallels and all the insertion of this information, all the synchronicities that have popped up for things that even I'm working on Galactic and Stellar Council. So this applies to a lot of the themes that Odin has been bringing through. I wish he was the one available today. He could really speak on this, but Isaac said he's the only one available today, evidently. So that hasn't been happening for us anymore. We have Elena and Vesa, Odin, Ragnar, and Isaac, and the Forest people. They seem to be, and Chrome, one of the Titans. This seems to be the kind of the circle that's gotten GIC tightened down to, and the lifting tightened down to. So which is fine by me. I prefer a tighter circle. It's safer that way. Isaac, I know you're the one that wanted to talk. Temporarily, while I'm here, still in Arizona, I don't have the bigger communication arc as well, so I'm using this guy for Isaac at the moment. With the Shungite skull cap here on the top, but I'll keep you out. Okay, as you were in a dark corner there. Okay, yeah. All right, give me a second. Ooh. He said as I was talking that I covered like 9/10 of it myself, but okay. All right, there we go. Had some mental attacks this morning, folks. So I had to keep my hat on. Normally, I don't have to, and hardly anymore. But it was just some very vicious attacking that took place before the show, and also the mind wipe during when I was talking about the nine. So that seems to be a point of contention for towards the AI God, as we said in GIC and other negative forces out there. When I refer anything to the nine, that's a major point of contention. So all right. Damn. Okay, Isaac, if you would, please. Okay, you're coming in kind of hot there. Okay. It's like a meteorite entering the atmosphere. This is how he's coming in. Mm. Okay, tone it back a little bit, please. Yes, what has been spoken about in this program is indeed true the way it has been depicted. The reason lore isn't covering this portion, the reason it was unwritten, is because in your own histories it has remained unwritten or forgotten. This is why this is also not there. There's a scarcer source material for the disclosure in that area. What he is picking up on is aspects of the some of the forgotten and unwritten histories regarding these figures. What was said about the dichotomy and the god and the man, yes, and then what he said about the dragon break, yes, all occurred. This also one area he did not put into consideration is several beings went through a certain dragon break where they had a man aspect or avatar and a godly form. Some of these can coexist exactly as at once, like Odin did, where his human aspect was someone that was running a pub in Scotland. That particular existence has become not reabsorbed, the wrong choice of words, reactualized or reintegrated. These are things that are unsaid also with the dichotomy between himself and Toran Kal being the face of the oversoul, and also one by the name of Woldar and others that are in stasis chambers. There is a dichotomy to be spoken of here. Also, other beings that operate out in the galactic territories and also coincide with their avatar here. Whereas, from their perspective, the avatar has already returned into the fold, you see, and is still operating at the same time. So it is actually both. There's a lot of beings that operate this way, some in the stasis, some in not. This has been said also on past GIC episodes that are in their archive currently. I was the one that encouraged them to amalgamate this to begin with because of certain cancel culture aspects and the like, and other targetings that were going on. They could refine this, but this is in this particular conversation, even with both of you, there are aspects of this where it seems like there is an is and is not. Multiversal physics aside, which he has been saying this ad nauseum to the point of needing to be slapped repeatedly in recent days, but and his recognition of this is good. But anyhow, in both of your lives, even including SSP and Secret Space Program aspects, there was still things running simultaneously for a period. This is of a similar type of thread. They are violating natural law to do this. Very much like you would think the Numidium was also doing the same, or the Ark of the Covenant doing the same. One could also argue that, as he saw in his Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda program, where there was an AI that had gone insane, and there was an aspect that was still good and remembered the heart of the whole being. There, one could argue that was how it was with Enlil, or slash Lucifer slash Loki, but it wasn't completely the case because Enlil created those bits of worship in that religion to begin with. So not as innocent. But there are aspects of beings where you do have the nastier, sometimes multiversal self controlling ones that are more passive or on the side of good and justice, like what was seen in your Multiverse of Madness with the two Doctor Stranges fighting. But in this, there are also aspects that are of the overall reaching that either could reflect an infection or reflect the overall library. Toran Kal straddles the line between both because of his involvement in that Dragon Break type incident on Atlantis, where there was a darker aspect that was bringing through conjurings in the magical respect, in the trying to conjure up things to defeat the Orions, but where was he pulling them from? The void dimension. So this was a bit of retardation on his part. So So there was also in that Dragon Break aspects of Toran Kal that were acting nearly seemingly independently, almost like a rogue expression in both aspects, in the corrupted and the not corrupted. This is why an audit is taking place for himself as this expression, one of those things. Anyway, this was not the only thing, mind you, but this can indeed happen to people that you think are everyday people as well. I can go into questions if you like.
Um, yeah, so I guess the most clear question that we could have here is this dichotomy of God to man and the issue of avatars is clearly a thing that's going on all the time. We may know people that are avatars of beings that have been worshipped because
Mhm.
I don't like the idea of saying gods unless there's like a clear there's no real divinity except for the divinity we create for ourselves, right? So um, ultimately, what are they just here to observe normally? Or are they actually learning and growing in the same way with these experiences?
Both. They are indeed learning and growing. Sometimes they are just here. I generally call those people wastes of space, much to their chagrin. But if you're here doing the auditing process, you see, and expanding and growing, you are indeed doing something because you're expanding and growing all aspects, all expressions, dimensions, timelines, even the collapsing, invading portions like Toran Kal got involved in. That is a bit of galactic history he wishes to step aside from, which I don't blame you. But in this is where him and I had a bit of contention because some of that, let's just say that Rubik's cube or that facet of that crystal was starting to affect his walking avatar. So in this, the whole entirety of the being is going through an audit process, which then expands their name. The name may even change to reflect a different vibratory frequency. Also, hence why certain deities, let's just say, I'll use the term in quotes, have different names under different cultures, different facets of the same crystal or diamond. Sometimes this causes worship confusion, as he said, especially in times of humans worshiping the being. This confuses things, but especially if they've instigated, which in some cases this did happen with Enlil. Even Toran Kal did instigate this at some point. Yours did too, very briefly, but it wasn't a big deal. This, in this particular way, though, a name for an oversoul can shift and change away from a worship point, just like what he was saying about Kali turning her name to Cassandra, for instance. The same goes for an oversoul. If there is a too high of a worship contention point, that can shift and change. You see, Odin tried it once as Woden. He tried it in other aspects, but he couldn't get over that hump. He has now. He found ways of protecting against this, both technologically and spiritually, on a soul level and on a physical level. You can get to that point. I don't want to say ascendance, that's the wrong word, but rising out of those ashes like a phoenix. And you can for certain OCD tendencies where you don't need certain revocations anymore. You can get out of that as well. Even though the Dreamtime revocation does not always comply with that, it's always needed. But other ones, such as when he here was having to revocate different AI coding all the time, they were trying to get him into the OCD mindset of trying always revocating constantly. That's when he fell into another snare. When you get into that centered I am presence, there are aspects of this that no longer matter, no longer occur. That's where Odin had to get to. He's no different than any other person, even though he's quite large, larger than life, but he's also more of a giant as well. You would see it as comparison to how you see both the Sumerian and Egyptian gods, where there's a human that's slightly smaller than you have the larger person on the throne. That's the type of size he is. But the point I'm making is, this can be shifted and changed to not be dangerous, to not affect, and beings do evolve in this respect, having been around it as your avatar here. Now, with other beings that choose avatars because they want a champion of some sort, that can drift either way. Like in the show Moon Knight, It was basically for some of the gods' best interest only, and not necessarily that of the humans. They showed that with Mark Spector, for instance, where he was this instant manifester, and one of the gods took advantage of this. There is that going on, hedge betting, seeing who can give a particular message and garner the most attention. That's happening in the channeling community, also in the past, in your own pasts, with different armies that the gods were hedge betting on who would be the most successful. This is how the Ryans got control of the Third Reich and created the Fourth Reich in space with the Martian Germans. This is how some of these things have occurred, and they too worship as well. So do the Ebens. They worship both an AI god and individual deities as well. One does not expect this from somebody who's wholly secular, but in this, they are essentially worshiping some of the same aspects of the same thing, very much like what the Thalmor accuse the Nords of worshiping Talos for. It is kind of similar, but not.
Okay. I guess the next question is when it's this being that's been worshipped, is the reason why they have to go into sort of a human or not or lower frequency um experience for like an entire lifetime to sort of strip away these layers? Is that to try to strip away the negativity of the worshipped status?
Yes, that can indeed happen. This is why Odin did what he did. Michael has done the same as well to a lesser extent. He kind of enjoys where he is, but we will not go into his mental retardation at this moment in time. But this particular issue is, yes, this plays out all the time. If you duck beneath all of this and you take a different name and a different face, you're not getting the brunt of that worship, and you're actually gaining a peaceful time. Well, peaceful enough during that audit process, doing your own shadow work and reintegrating what you need to. This is how Odin gained the immunity that he needed from this. Some of these other beings are learning this, some slower and faster than others. And the same thing with humans getting bombarded by mental attacks and the like. Like I said, with his AI experiences and everything, he's gaining a particular brain chemistry immunity to this, like a phoenix rising out of the ashes. So yes, this is the main purpose of why some incarnate is to go below that line and find that sweet spot by which then they can gain this immunity and grow from that particular point, as to not allow that to happen again. Very much like a virus getting an antigen, let's say.
Okay. Um, and the avatar thing, that's not the same as sort of coming in to strip off that godly persona. That's more like coming in to use that power to sort of steer things, right?
It's actually both operating in tandem. The audit and the steering tend to be close bedfellows, let's just say, because a being comes in that's slightly ahead of the curve, creates maybe a waypoint or basically trailblazing to where others can follow this. Not necessarily in a worship sense. Some people that are in a certain frequency tend to garner like a guru type of attention. I would not recommend this. It is the same thing that the others have gone through. But if you're trying to get a message out to multiple people, what they're doing, classes, courses, and even talking to a larger audience is not a bad thing, as long as they don't allow the, let's just say, the groupie worship of this, as well as taking that energy and integrating certain information into the Akashic grid, benevolent Akashic grid, that is, in millimeters and centimeters, causing permanent changes down here. So it is actually an amalgam of both the audit process, and through that, certain shadow work and expansions are taking place by which then a trail is blazed.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think you've answered all my questions.
Um,
And I thank you for your time, Isaac.
hmm. Yes, thank you. These are always fun. These conversations are always fun. These are going very, very deep, even though I like to say that this is a video game world. This has been integrated in such a way now that this is being recognized and being displayed next to actual galactic histories. This is why he was getting hit, you see, with this. This is why I had him wear his hat this morning. We are not necessarily pulling his strings, as others are also surmising from some of these recordings. We are walking side by side with him. We've even outright refused to do things that he's asked because of it may blow back on him, us, and other aspects of his family, and dear Joanna and yourselves. So there are certain things that we are showing him to do slow drip and millimeters and centimeters, but he knew the concept coming in all along. So it's all we're all working kind of in tandem. So thank you for having me on as usual. Ugh. Ooh, yeah, he came in kind of hot when he was coming in this today. It was like a meteorite coming through the atmosphere today. And even though he's like right here, and also I talked to Elena and Vessa quite a bit as well, and they, I showed this. It's still in the wrapper, but there's a painting that they're in. It's still in the wrapper. I managed to get this from the artist before the artist passed away, and they're using the that as a means to talk even through the wrapper. So I've noticed that focal points like that tend to help. Sometimes they become corrupted. Like say you had that statue of Talos. Sometimes these focal points can become corrupted with ill worship and ill focus as well, depending on the groups as well. I've noticed that time and again. Skulls can, unless you put shungite silver and all that. Everybody knows that aspect of this, but I'm not going to go into that. But this, yeah, what he was saying was true. I was seeing all the images in my head as he was pointing it out, like say Odin existing also as that tavern owner in Scotland. I was seeing the dichotomy there, where he was affecting not only change in that particular zone in little increments in millimeters and centimeters, he was also doing his own shadow work and audit, and now he's in a position where he's in a much better position on Asgard, or where Asgard is currently in the etherics and in their dimensional layer than where he was before. So I find that very, very interesting. Some go the other direction. I've seen beings go completely south because of this as well. And this is where people want to see the oversoul as totally divine. It's learning. You're learning. And people hate the lesson portion of this, but that's still true. Even though there's a ton of overage and a ton of garbage out there, there's still some learning to be had. And that sometimes some things that go south here will reflect badly over here as well. And that has to be audited again somewhere else. Not necessarily the way people are expecting on another planet or another expression or anything like that. Sometimes they just have to be cleansed. Now there are aspects here of people that have come in, like when Chadwick Boseman and Jeffrey Hunter came in, for instance. They both told us that they didn't accomplish what they set out to accomplish here. So they had a long laundry list. Their souls told us they had a long laundry list. They didn't accomplish everything. And this is something for some spiritual people. This is hard for them to understand. They see it as just totally divine and totally human. And it's a fusion. It's a mantling, as we've said before, where you're mantling the better portions of all here. And I couldn't have described that any better than we have on past Elder Scrolls shows. It's coming very handy. That word mantling is coming very handy. And it's people think it's the opposite of ascension. Ascension was more of a soul trap concept where you're being forced in the energy form outward. This is more the mantling and the grounding and the completion of that and becoming whole and learning from that experience and the I am presence. So that's essentially kind of what they were getting at, but they've been so indoctrinated to believe it's the other way. They think I'm trying to denigrate it. Where they believe some people lose their identity and go into like a we state, like we were saying before, or get absorbed back into source. You don't want that. You want the mantling to occur. And that's what I've been able to surmise so far. I don't know if you have anything else to add to this, Ryan, before we take it out.
No, I'm kind of still trying to wrap my brain around it
Yeah, I
myself.
do that too. That's why I talk so fast. It's rolling through my brain as fast as possible, and it's like I'm trying to decipher and encode it myself to put it out, and it tends to confuse. Sometimes it tends to confuse people if I do too quickly like that. So, as I do with all other shows, I'm hereby closing this circle with true benevolence, no conflicting agendas as far as this information goes. And I'm making sure that there is no negative blowback for this particular episode in all communications there within. So thank you everybody for watching this episode of Disclosure in the Media. Hopefully you enjoyed this. This is the fourth part in this Talos series, and I think it's been very enlightening. So thank you everybody. Bye bye now.